Hey, this is Connor from Biker's Edge, and today is going to be very different.
Dive right in, let's go. Move forward and dip in the toe. Let the rhythm take control. It's going down tonight, yeah.
So we spent the week in Basque country, riding bikes, doing a factory tour, eating a lot of ham, and checking out the brand new 2023 Wild. This is going to be part vlog, part bike review, and part tutorial courtesy of our buddy Geoff Gulevich. So stick around for this odd mashup of a video. We sat down with Orbea in their Mallorca, Spain HQ factory to see the awesome brand new Orbea Wild e-bike. It is incredible, and more on that later. We will be riding it in this video. And then we did a tour of the factory. We got to see the process start to finish of how Orbea makes a bicycle. And if one thing stood out from this entire factory tour or HQ experience, it's that Orbea sweats the small stuff. They have a great attention to detail. That attention to detail comes across not only in the build quality of their bikes and how their company is run, but in how those bikes ride out on the trail. We also spent a day riding the new Wild in the Basque country with Doug from Basque MTB. Doug not only is an incredible rider and tour guide, he built most of the trails we ended up riding that day, so he's also an excellent trail builder. Hats off to Doug, and thank you for showing us around. I'm pretty sure we all had a hell of a time. Challenging is the first word that comes to mind when I think about riding Doug's trails. They were very tight with steep technical switchbacks and very narrow treads, so it was a blast, and the Wild was up for every challenge that those trails threw at us. And now we're at the part that you probably clicked on the video for, which is how does the new Orbea Wild ride? This is not going to be a full review because one day out in unfamiliar terrain is not enough to evaluate a bicycle, but it is good enough to start forming some first impressions. So we're going to cover what's new with the Wild for 2023 and go over those first impressions. So like I said earlier, Orbea sweats the small stuff. They sweat those small details, and the Wild is the perfect example of small details making a huge impact in how a bike rides. So high level changes from the old Wild FS to the Wild. We see vastly improved geometry, we see updated suspension kinematics, and we see a smart, holistic design that makes the bike work together as a whole very, very well. For example, the Wild has the cleanest cockpit I have ever seen on an e-bike. It's cleaner than most pedal bike cockpits, which is pretty impressive. The sizing is very well thought out with a lot of overlap between sizes and room for long travel dropper posts on all frame sizes. The frame is stiff, it's responsive, and Orbea offers different sized batteries based on your needs for range versus handling characteristics. Let's run through some numbers on the new Wild. The head tube angle is 64 degrees. The seat tube angle is now steeper at 77.5 degrees. The chainstays have gotten shorter at 448 millimeters. And that's a rather impressive number considering this bike is only a 29er. There are no mullet options here, so that's a pretty decent chainstay length for having a big wheel on the back. The frame offers 160 millimeters of travel, and it is compatible with either a 160 or a 170 millimeter fork. The new Wild offers a ton of overlap between sizes, letting you pick the size you want to ride based on how you want the bike to ride, rather than physical limitations of you simply fitting on the bike. For example, I rode an extra large, which was big and stable, which is generally what I prefer. Had I wanted a more nimble ride, I easily would have fit on a large. And speaking of the extra large, the reach on my bike was 505 millimeters, which gives the bike a 1305 millimeter wheelbase. Orbea has completely redesigned this frame, and one thing they did is they took out the battery removal window. So now you do have to pull the motor to get the battery out, which is mildly inconvenient if you're trying to swap batteries, but Orbea has their reasoning. They were not able to get the frame as stiff as they would like it with that window. So to offer the highest performance they could possibly offer, they had to ditch that window, and now you do have to pull the motor to pull the battery. And for better or worse, the cables now all route through the headset. And take a deep breath. before you go typing all these comments about how terrible of an idea that is. Orbea seems to have done a little bit better job than some of the other people we have seen who have done this recently. The weather sealing and the waterproofing is much better with different plugs and adapters so that any cable configuration you might have, there are no empty holes on the bike, so water's not just pouring into your head tube. They've also made sure to not route anything through the stem or bars on this bike, so removing the handlebars or changing your stack height or changing anything, you don't have to undo cables, which would be super frustrating and annoying. The only inconvenience is that to change your upper headset bearing, you will have to unroute your cables, which isn't awesome, but they have included a very high quality, long lasting stainless steel upper headset bearing, which should last a really, really long time. So when you're doing your regular cable maintenance anyway, pull all those cables and replace your bearing, and you probably won't ever have to touch it. Let's talk about the drive system, which is one of my favorite parts about the bike. It uses the Bosch CX Line performance motor, which I really liked when I rode it on the Ibis Oso. And some builds in the wild will get the race edition of this motor, which is really, really cool. It offers so much power, it is insane. And the extended boost feature where you let off the pedals and the motor keeps on giving you just a little bit juice for longer than most other bikes did take a little bit of getting used to, but out on the trail it ended up being a huge, huge factor. I found it made it a lot easier to give you just that little extra oomph to get up and over a technical, bumpy, rocky feature. And the best part about it for me is you could stop pedaling just a little bit sooner and still carry your momentum up and over the feature. So you weren't smacking your pedals or getting caught up trying to pedal over these rough and rugged features. For our test ride, all of our bikes were equipped with the larger 750 watt-hour battery, although Orbea will sell you a 625 watt-hour battery for this bike, which is about 2 pounds lighter. And that 2 pounds makes a big difference because of where it comes off of the bike. The battery just gets shorter, so it doesn't extend up near your head tube as far as the bigger battery. So you're losing 2 pounds from a very critical part of the bike, which is going to improve the handling. So if you want, you can get the smaller battery or the bigger battery, and that's really based on how you want the bike to ride and how much range you really need. Speaking of range, we did a 21.5 mile ride with about 4,500 feet of vert, and no one's battery died. We were all getting pretty close by the end though. And I do have to say the Bosch system integration on the Wild is probably the best I've ever seen. In the past, we've seen some pretty clunky setups with the Bosch drive system, but that is not the case here. Orbea has put the system controller right on the top tube. It's got your battery indicator and power mode indicators on it. And there is a tiny brand new mini remote that connects with Bluetooth so you don't have extra wires. It is really, really sleek. So now let's get into some really quick ride impressions. Again, not a full review. So the Wild is a really impressive climber. It offered a ton of traction and the handling was really, really nice. We did spend probably the majority of our time climbing fire roads, which kind of seems like that's how it's done in the Basque country. But we did spend quite a bit of time on rocky bench cuts and hillsides, as well as really stupid steep moto trails and some rather tight, twisty single track. And the Wild never felt like it wasn't up to the task. It was always ready to handle whatever was in front of it. The climb position on the bike was very nice. I did feel like my weight was very evenly centered between the two wheels. The cockpit was a little low for my liking. It had a fairly flat handlebar on it, but that's easily fixed. For baby giraffes like myself, put a riser bar on there and that'll get me where I would like to be. The two biggest takeaways for me on the climbs were how much traction the bike offered and that drive system, especially in race mode. Anytime there's a really rough, rocky feature, pop it in race, get over the feature very easily and carry on. And now on the downhills, the Wild felt very true to Orbea's roots. Orbea generally makes bikes that place an emphasis on handling and control over all-out capability. The Rayon is a great example of this. It is a very capable long travel enduro bike, but it doesn't always ride like a big, burly, sluggish bike. It's got quick, fast, snappy handling, and the Wild is very similar in that regard. The handling is excellent, but the Wild does obviously ride bigger and a little bit heavier than the Rayon in a very good way. It felt very deep, very bottomless, and very plush. I think some of that's probably the e-bike effect, and I think a lot of it is just the suspension kinematics. It never went so far that it felt slow and sluggish though. As far as handling on a big full power e-bike goes, it is up there with some of the very best. In fact, the handling was the shining star for me on the downhill. We rode some trails with very tight technical switchbacks, which, if you know anything about me, is where I am the worst at bikes. And the Wild handled it all pretty easily. It was confident and slack and stable enough that you could trust it on the steep, rough switchbacks, but it was also manageable and maneuverable enough that you could physically get the bike around the corner. So a really nice balance there. Overall on the descents, I really liked it. The off-the-top sensitivity was great. The bottom-out control was great, but really that handling was superb. It reminds me a little bit of the Santa Cruz Heckler in how well it handles, so maybe we're gonna have to do a showdown. So this is where we're getting to our Pro and a Joe segment. If you've watched any of the GoPro footage up to this point, it is very obvious that Geoff Gulevich might be a little bit better at bikes than me. So I pulled him aside during our ride and asked if he'd be willing to give me a couple of pointers so that I could be less bad at bikes. And being the good human that he is, he offered some great advice. So look at this as a way for you to learn vicariously through me by someone who's actually qualified, so not me. Enjoy. All right, so Geoff gave me some good advice of using the trail a little more liberally, not being so rigid in my line choice, and we've got a pretty good section of trail here to learn how to do that better. So coach me through it, Geoff.
Well, I'd say this area here definitely isn't as technical as what we were seeing up a little bit higher, but this is a great example because I'd say 100% of the people, well, probably 99% of the riders would go down through here, through these rocks.
On this like right channel.
Yeah, and they'd be setting themselves up for more turns and more work than they have to. Whereas on our bikes, they're so capable. You can literally roll this step, roll that step, and straighten out this section so you're set up better for that left into that move down there. And it's just, you don't have to ride where everybody else is riding. You can free ride, as some people say.
On a trail.
Yeah, make it yours. Enjoy it.
It looks a little intimidating from back here.
Yeah, you come in blind, you're taking the quick 2 turns into it. And this is actually a pretty mellow feature.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
You're just maintaining your speed, coming nice and controlled. Obviously you want to stay a little bit left because that's going to set you back up for the corner, and you're not going to be smashing into that big rock on the right there. So little things like that, like obviously this would be worthwhile to take a quick peek at before riding, as we are now. But overall, this one's pretty chill in my opinion.
See if all this is easier said than done. Rocks instead of going the bad way.
The steps of doom. Get it.
Oh boy. That's great. Maybe next time he can teach me how to stop casing every jump I see. All right, so that's gonna do it for us. Hopefully you liked this style of video. If you did, let me know. If you didn't, also let me know, but I'm still gonna make them anyway because it was pretty fun for me to do. Make sure you stay tuned for the full Orbea Wild review, and we'll see you next time.